Hello, a warm welcome to you from Aztec, your training company based in Dubai. I'm Tony Evans, and I'm one of the consultants delivering procurement, supply chain, and warehousing. My background is in logistics and supply chain. I started my career in the Army, having a full career. I then joined a contractor to Marks and Spencer's and worked in distribution centres in London, Paris, and Madrid. A time with a manufacturer enabled me to see the links between procurement, logistics, and the customer. So that's me. I then branched out after Marks and Spencer's on my own and now teach purchasing, supply chain, and warehousing to organizations around the world. I trust that you can all see me and that there are no problems. If there are problems, there is a chat line on the right hand side. I can see that Apollinarius has just greeted just now, and I've sent a message earlier on to welcome you. So I'm going to be keeping open that chat line on the right hand side of the screen. I hope it doesn't detract. So what I'm going to do is give you some information about the implications of the coronavirus on procurement. The purpose of this webinar is to look at a topic which is affecting us all today. That is the implications of coronavirus on procurement. Procurement and the supply chain has never been so much in the spotlight as it is today during this worldwide pandemic. This short webinar looks at how we bought goods and services in the past and how this will change as a result of the crisis. Purchasing and the supply chain will be different in the future, and we all have to appreciate this. And in this 1 hour webinar, I'll give you some suggestions of how to manage that in the future. There is an opportunity to ask questions throughout the webinar, but I'll respond to them at the end. If you'd like to leave all the questions, otherwise it just gets a bit congested. So write the question in the right-hand column and I'll be able to see them as we go through. Let us look at the importance of procurement. Procurement can often be the largest spend in an organization. And as the process must be understood in order for the organization to remain solvent. Just as a reminder, the goals of procurement. And I'm assuming that most of you will be associated with procurement. We have to have the right source. We need to know the source, but we need to go back to the original source and to determine the origin and the country of that origin. That's quite important. That's been brought up during this crisis. The right place. We require that the goods should be delivered to the right place, be it in a warehouse or in the operational site. The right product. This may seem obvious, but we need to receive what we've ordered as per the specification. The right time. We should link this in with the lead time. I'm going to discuss the lead time in a second. When a supplier promises a time to be delivered, it should be then, not early, not late. The right price. A great deal is spoken about the price being the most important aspect of the deal. However, we should also consider other factors. It's not just price. When I'm teaching procurement, I say the words NJP quite regularly, not just price. We have to consider things like customer service, after sales, and delivery, for example. 2 more rights, the right quality. What we receive should be as per the order and as per the specification. The right quantity. We do not want to have more or less than ordered. To receive more means that we have to store it and we may not sell it. So we have to bear the costs of the storage. Looking at how we've bought in the past, I want to give you the following process. I want to consider a rubber glove. It could be used in a doctor's surgery or a hospital. These gloves are part of the PPE, which is very topical at the moment, as they're required by medical staff working on the front line in hospitals, care homes, and in doctors' surgeries. The source material is rubber, and the raw material is brought by the glove manufacturer. To make it easier, what I'm going to do is to not only ignore packaging, but I'm going to give you a slide which starts to illustrate the process. You can see on the left-hand side raw material rubber. The raw materials are bought by the manufacturer. Don't bother to write these down unless you really don't want to. We will send these out and they will be available to you, these slides. What I'm doing is building up these slides. So you've got raw material rubber, purchaser, manufacturer, warehousing, sales, and so on. As I said, I won't be considering packaging, only the raw material, the actual finished glove. So, raw materials are bought for the manufacturer. Natural rubber, also called by other names of India rubber, latex, Amazonian rubber, as initially produced, consisted of polymers of the organic compound isoprene with minor impurities. We have to consider, if you remember what I said just now, the source. These raw materials come from Thailand and Indonesia. They are the two leading rubber producers. Currently, rubber is harvested mainly in the form of latex, and it's from the rubber tree. The latex is a sticky, milky solid drawn off by making incisions in the bark and collecting the fluid in vessels, known as tapping. The latex then refined into rubber that's ready for the commercial processing in major areas. Latex is allowed to coagulate in the collection cup, and these lumps are collected and processed in the forms for their marketing. Now, why I've concentrated on this is it's important to know the original source. The original source for the material of that is obviously coming from this tree. So we not only have to have traceability, but we also need to be aware of the influences that would restrict that source. Fire, tsunami, viruses. Let's now return to our slides. So from the manufacturer, the finished goods go to a warehouse, either owned by the manufacturer or outsourced to a third party. So we've got sales, selling to often an agent, a retailer, and a customer. I'm going to be exploring this one in a minute. Now, if you wanted to know more about the production of rubber gloves, that's a good reference. Here we've got agent, retailer, customer, patient. They are essentially the final consumer. The consumer, the person that uses the product or service but may not pay for it. So in this case, the patient is the end of the line, the consumer, but may not have paid for it. The next slide I'm going to show you has a number of red box eyes on it. And that is essentially where the product is pushed through the supply chain. Push. What's this push all about? Push is where product is placed along the supply chain, not to the patient, though it may be, and there is stock held there. It's passed through the system to the retailer. The opposite of push is pull, and it's where the customer or consumer demands stock through it often causes lead time. Let's just talk this through again. So pushing product through and making it available to the customer. So let me go just one more slide where we have you see the green arrow being pulled. Let's explore the two processes in more detail. Taking the push process. Goods are pushed through the system to a retailer where they wait to be purchased. There's no guarantee, this is one of the important things, that these goods will be sold, and they may be returned to the manufacturer for either scrap or to be sold at a greatly reduced price. The advantages of push, on the other hand, to the consumer is that there's availability and convenience. So when you go shopping, there is stock there. Unfortunately, during this crisis, we had a problem. Even though we thought we had sufficient stock, we didn't. That's a view of my local supermarket where there should be bread. That there, toilet rolls. And a similar photograph there. Panic buying. So pull is where upstream pull the product and where procurement orders the product. You're used to this in your job. This product is not readily available, so there's a lead time. That could include manufacturing. The pull process may indeed go back to the source. So the lead time for certain products, the pull, may go all the way back to the raw material. The big advantage of pull is that the customer gets what he wants in the form that he's requested it. In the early days of the current crisis, there was excessive demand. And as I've said before, that was the result. In our local high street, toilet rolls, disinfectant and bread ran out of stock, leading to panic buying. We're still in UK short of certain items. These photographs show how panic buying and hoarding was evident. Professor Benton of Chatham House says that governments are hoarding too. Kazakhstan banned exports of wheat flour. Thailand has stopped exporting eggs. Vietnam has expended rice exports, and Russia is talking about limiting grain exports to protect supplies. It's not clear how many more governments will follow suit, but if they keep putting their nation first, the situation can only get worse. Protectionist policies coupled with panic buying could create a self-perpetuating cycle of rising foods. At the same time as panic buying, retailers were cancelling orders, and I'll discuss this a bit later. So, back to the diagram. There is a supply chain from raw material to the patient. That's the flow. Upstream downstream, pull and push. When you go shopping, or indeed if you are in procurement when you order, think of this diagram. And this will become clear in a minute when we start to analyze supply chain. Let me just ask you at that particular stage whether there are any questions. Are we all okay? So, having looked at the normal flow, and I'll leave this up for the time being, let's look at ways that we can change what we do now, how we work, what we should be doing now and in the future. And I will talk about the now and then the future. So essentially, what should we be planning now? The first aspect that we should consider is we need to understand the supply chain. That's the supply chain. We need to gain an appreciation of who our suppliers are and where these suppliers are located. We have to analyze this. We have to analyze the supply chain beyond our tier one suppliers. We have to consider the supplier's supplier to fully understand the exposure to the affected countries and regions. There will be suppliers of suppliers. In some cases, the list can go on. We also want to know about our customers and our customer's customer. Similar to the supply chain on the demand chain, notice two new words I'm introducing there. Supply side, demand side, push and pull. Similar to the supply chain and the demand chain, we have to know in the chain the final consumer. Companies which neglect the opportunity to fundamentally rethink their supply chains do so at their peril. This is especially true when it comes to defining a more sustainable, healthily, and environmentally friendly food production. The second point I want to be considering now is we should map the supply chain. I've essentially done this as an outline for the rubber glove. That one. That's mapped a supply chain. There's a lot of detail, however, in that plan that needs to be filled in. We can learn an awful lot through mapping a process, as we can visually interpret it. One of the ways of doing this is actually go into, say, a conference room, get some A1 sheets of paper and post them up and draw it. Draw it similar to what I've done in my diagram. We now need to manage inventory. We now have to manage it as it's the key to effective procurement. It doesn't matter whether the products that we have in our cupboards, our home, or goods in our company warehouses, they all have to be managed. Procurement plays a vital role in this, and from now on we should question our inventory levels and the risk we face from not having the right products at the right time. Prior to the crisis that's currently affecting us all, I used to teach minimum stocks. But we have to be very, very careful to know what stocks we allow to go down and what stocks we have to have. We have to have the right products at the right time. We have to build into our plans the critical items, those which we have or have to have in the organization, or it will stop. And we also have to consider when we're buying how much we buy. One of the things I've been putting forward is we have to know our suppliers and where the supply is. We have to challenge where we hold stock, as well as our source. Could we, for example, have a relationship with a similar company? What about a competitor? To share stocks, especially capital items. That's very controversial. But have we been without stock during this crisis? We have to look into the future's key variables. We have to plan to events. How likely are events to happen? Even the extreme possibility of another pandemic. We should be working with other departments in the company, as well as suppliers. One example of what has happened is in the fashion industry, is that more than half, 51%, of Bangladeshi garment suppliers have had their bulk or all of their orders cancelled by buyers. Some examples of recent cancelled orders. Primark, $273 million. C&A, $166 million, cancelled. Tesco, $50 million. Marks and Spencer's, $39 million. It is reported that although buyers have a contractual obligation to buy these, many are making dubious use of general force majeure clauses to justify their violations in the terms of the contract. Almost 3/4 of the buyers refuse to pay for raw materials such as fabric already purchased by the supplier, and 91% refuse to pay the production costs of the supplier. As a result of cancelled orders and lack of payment, 58% of factories surveyed reported having to shut down most of their or all of their operations, and more than 1 million garment workers have already been fired or furloughed. How many of these companies will start up again after the crisis? The next point we have to be considering now is manage risk. We need to appreciate the levels of risk that we're prepared to accept. What has this pandemic taught us? Have we been able to survive without resorting to outside help, such as bank or government loans or handouts? If we've had their assistance, how will we manage going forward to put ourselves into a positive situation? One key lesson from the pandemic is the importance of spreading risk. So says Tim Lawrence, supply chain expert at PA Consulting. Companies should avoid clustering suppliers, and this is an important point. They should avoid clustering supplies in one region and around similar supply chains. Reconsider whether it makes sense to create isolated supply chains and to understand the location risks in every tier of the supply chain. The supply chain may not be as diverse as you think. For example, your alternative suppliers may themselves be reliant on tier 3 or tier 4 suppliers in the same region. You need to do that. You need to do that now. The last point we need to be considering now is measure, measure, measure. We have to measure and do this more often. Procurement needs to measure not only what they're doing, but what effects their actions are having on internal departments, customers, and suppliers. So, having a look at a list there, let's have a look how we can actually reduce the impact of the pandemic now. We need to prioritize our high-risk supply sources, not just by geography, but by sector, commodity, or value to the business. Leaders need to accelerate plans to diversify supply chains geographically and avoid a total loss in the supply chain in the future. We have to seek out alternative sources of supply. This could be in different countries, as well as alternative transportation routes, something I would suggest we haven't considered before, that of alternative transport routes. Associated with that, you need to factor in alternative sources, transit times to alternative ports. You've got to keep communication channels open with your key suppliers. Take care of your suppliers when times are good, so that when times are bad, they can take care of you. Examine price hikes, whether they occur because of macroeconomic conditions. It's very easy for farmers to write suppliers off as opportunistic. Don't rely on forecasted supply data or current inventory levels. Understand your critical inventory, those stock items which the organization cannot do without. We need to think about travel plans. Are you traveling too much? Can't we use teleconferencing similar to what we're doing now instead of face-to-face meetings? Think about any additional costs that you may incur, such as non-delivery of goods to your customers. And then think about your warehouses, whether they're quickly reaching capacity. And if they are, and if you can accept any more goods. The consequences of not accepting any goods in your warehouse could be potentially catastrophic. Blockages upstream in the supply chain, fully loaded containers and trucks unable to discharge, ports unable to cope with the backlog, ultimately prevention of the flow of essential supplies such as goods and pharmaceuticals. You have to appreciate that procurement is partially responsible for the stock in the warehouse. A quick pause. Is everybody okay? Just have a look down the list to see if everyone is okay. No one coming up. Okay. What I'm moving on to now is to discuss what we should do in the long term. This is your action plan. This is what I'd like you to take away from this webinar. So, what should we do in the long term? We should carry out a lessons learned debriefing to highlight critical areas of supply which could cause a problem in the future and build in those mitigation plans to get over the problem. We should forge alliances with organizations in your sectors, or perhaps we should say not necessarily in your sector, because they may have some of the aspects that you want. Develop new markets of supply, whether a limited number of suppliers or suppliers limited by geography. Spread your sourcing across multiple suppliers in different geographies. It's the point I mentioned earlier on. Look to develop more local sources of supply. Not only will you have full visibility of your supply chain, but there could be extra benefits such as reducing ethical sourcing risks, improved sustainability, and boosting local economies. Review the contract terms to mitigate future risks. For instance, will force majeure clauses be applicable in your situation to enforce or accept liability? So, what have we learned today? We certainly know the future will not be the same as in the past. We must be prepared to do things differently and accept the change. And regarding change, we must willingly accept change, or indeed we could lead change. But above all, we should plan, and more plan. I've given you some ideas and tips and given you some examples of what has happened before. We have to be ready for the end of the lockdown. We're in lockdown in UK, slightly reduced in England as of today, but UK is essentially locked down. We should not be caught out by organisations that prepared themselves for the relaxation of the restrictions. Now, before I summarise, are there any questions from the attendees, please? Is everybody okay? If you have the opportunity, go to our Aztec website and see if there are any more webinars that you could follow, but also some online courses that you could attend and have a similar experience. I'll be conducting an online course on warehousing at the end of the month, and I hope to see you then. I'll be here to receive any questions, but for now, thank you for attending this webinar. I've got two questions here. Explain price hikes. Price hikes is where a supplier takes the advantage of raising the price when there is a shortage of goods. I bought some pharmaceutical goods, some aspirin, and the price had gone up nearly $1.50 per packet. So people taking advantage of price hikes, opportunistic, because people want the goods, supply side want the goods, so therefore the price goes up. Got a question here from the doctor. Is there a difference between the supply chain and materials management? Interesting question. If you have a look at the chain that I drew for the diagram, that's essentially illustrating a supply chain. Managing materials could indeed be managing them in a particular location, so manage materials management. Does that explain what you are after? You like to write a reply there. Doctor, did you manage to reply? I can't see any reply from you. And can we see the map again? Certainly. You're calling this the map. Logistics flow diagram, fine. I don't mind a map. Important aspect is the flow of goods through the supply chain to the end user. The pull, that's demand, and then the push, that's supply. Think about that when you go buying. You may be here. You may be here. You have to think upstream. You have to think downstream. Thank you for your questions. I'm now signing off. Have a good day, and I look forward to seeing you on one of the Aztec courses shortly. Goodbye.